I can guarantee you the biggest bottleneck in your business, in your life is you. You are the problem.
Microphone check, 1, 2, what is this?
You're now listening to a brand new episode of the Play Big Faster podcast.
Look what you done started. Let's go.
Ready when you are.
Welcome to another episode of the Play Big Faster podcast. I'm joined today by Adam Strong. Adam is an entrepreneur and has so many great nuggets for us today, just about how to get started with entrepreneurship and the lessons he's learned along the way. Adam, thank you so much for joining the podcast.
Great to be here. Looking forward to the conversations.
Now, you also are a fellow podcaster, correct?
I am. Yes, ma'am.
What's the name of your podcast?
It's called The Business Strategist. We've been running it for about 4 years, and we just hit 307 episodes.
Oh, that is awesome. Yeah. So, yeah, podcasting is a journey. When I first started, I didn't absolutely love it, but I've grown to love it over time and just meeting great people and the conversations. What is your formula for success with the podcast?
It's a really interesting point. I think with a podcast is that my personal journey, I think we're all on different personal journeys, Sri, right? I think for me is I always wanted to start a podcast, but we always hit that same question, which is, how do I do that? Like you would always go into the methodology of things. Oh, I'm not an editor. I'm not a graphic designer. Oh my God, what's all these things? What's all these moving parts that actually creates a really good production? And actually, a lot of those things really doesn't make any difference because there's answers to everything out there. So one of the things that I did was I'd made this conscious choice after running one of our digital summits, which was one of our first summits that we did. All the audience were like, so what's next? What's next? I'm like, okay, let's do the podcast. I'll do the podcast now. And then obviously I tapped into someone that has been in this area of this industry who had the expertise. And so and this is really crucial. I think what's really important when it came to podcast, Shri, was understanding the purpose of the reason why it exists in terms of the message. You know what I'm saying? Same for you here and your listeners, right? There's a reason why we come here. There's a reason why we listen to Shri, purely because there's a purpose. There's a higher order, should we say, attached to that. So I think it's really important. All of the fun stuff that plays an important role, but really the core foundation is, why am I doing this? What's the purpose? Why are we here? I think that was really, for me, that was extremely important to understand that, but it also helps us to create clarity and direction in what we're doing as people, as entrepreneurs. I don't know if you found that in your journey.
Definitely. And what's so amazing about it is that prior to the pandemic, and a lot of my conversation lately has been pre and post pandemic, just the way that you look at podcasting, because podcasting is not a new thing at all. But when we were all confined to our homes or restricted in our movement because of the global pandemic, there were so many people who were discovering podcasts.
Yep.
And so I absolutely love it. And the thing about it is there are some that are a lot more informal than your traditional media outlets like television or radio and things like that. So it's just really a whole new medium for people to discover things. I have met people on this podcast that literally could be doing 50K speeches somewhere. The depth of their knowledge about their subject matter is awesome. Yeah. But they have a platform that reaches people in another way, a platform that is not a traditional platform. So I love the fact that you are celebrating 300 plus episodes of the podcast. That's awesome.
Appreciate that. Yeah. Listen, it's all about consistency, right? Interestingly enough, though, today, I think there's around 3.5 million podcasts globally, but only 10% of them, which is a very small number, only 10% of them actually get to 10 plus episodes. The rest, they just disappear off the face of the planet, or they just, whoever it is that creates the podcast, it's not for them, or whatever the reason is. But it's such a small minority. That's like 350,000 podcasts. Most of the listeners are either in China or in the United States alone. You guys make up 85% of the podcast audience worldwide, which is crazy.
So for you personally, what is it that drives you? Because podfade, like you just mentioned, is a real thing. And you have the podcasts that start up and then they fade away. What are some of the things that you do just tactically with your podcast that keep you energized and keep the podcast going?
Yeah, it's a good question. From my perspective, I think what really gets me going is living back and going back to the real reason why I created it in the first place. I think it's really core and really important to understand the wider legacy, the legacy part of the podcast effectively. So there's a reason why you created yours. But for me, it's all about legacy. I'm not interested in making millions and millions of dollars just from making a podcast, right? Unless you're obviously Joe Rogan, of course. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that my big thing is all about how can I create more impact? How can I build a legacy based and a podcast is a great platform to do that. It's a great platform to be able to build brand, but also it's a great way to build trust with the audience, right? So you guys that are listening in, some of you are going to resonate with me, some of you are not. And guess what? I'm okay with either. Do you know what I'm saying? So I think that's really important to understand that. But yeah, I hope that's answering your question a little bit. Yeah.
So, with entrepreneurship,
Mm.
that is definitely a choice. Everyone doesn't desire to have their own business. What are some of the things that you would share with someone who was looking maybe to transition from W-2 employment to being a business owner and becoming an entrepreneur?
Well, in fairness, I've not really had a job ever, believe it or not. I've never really worked for anybody. So you're probably asking the wrong person. However, I did work for McDonald's, believe it or not, when I was the age of 16. So I worked for McDonald's for 8.5 years. Now, everyone, obviously, in the US, there's a McDonald's in every street corner. But the point I'm trying to make is that entrepreneurship is a choice, okay? But it's also not an easy choice to make. It isn't for everybody because I think there's this kind of self-perceptual reality that entrepreneurship is sold as it's going to be easy. You have freedom, baby. You can make your own money. You can make your own choices. You can work with who you want. Who doesn't want that? You know what? If it was that easy, everyone would be signing up. Okay.
Exactly.
It doesn't work like that. It really doesn't. Listen, I actually started up my first business aged 11 years old, right? 11 years old is when I first started up my first
And what
company.
type of business was this?
Believe it or not, my first ever business was collecting golf balls, collecting lost golf balls, right? And then selling them on the golf course.
I love the idea because you literally have zero startup cost.
Exactly.
And exactly, yes, awesome. 11-year-old, you are a
Yeah,
brilliant mind.
exactly. But the thing is, you also learn a lot of life lessons. If you throw yourself in the deep end, and if you look at children's minds, they're people. Children are very curious, and they will never take no for an answer. I've got kids. You got kids, Sheree?
I do. Madison and Dylan.
There you go, right? So when Madison and Dylan were growing up, when they were growing from like a baby to a toddler, how many times did they fall down to try and get back up to try and walk again?
More than I can count.
Exactly. Children are persistent because they believe that they can do it. And they haven't been ingrained into negativity. You can't do this or whatever it is. Like they've not been exposed to that. Whereas us adults, which have been exposed to a lot of the stuff, right, have fear and fear of judgment and negativity and pessimism and things like that. It doesn't have to be like that. But there's a lot of life lessons that I had learned from the age of 11. For example, the art of negotiation, right? So when to walk away from a deal, when is a good deal, when is a bad deal, right? That's a really
Right.
important lesson, right? Think of being able to learn that when you were really young and being able to learn and being able to put it into your entrepreneurial world right now. It's crazy. Sales and just approaching people with no fear. What have you got to lose? What's the worst thing that can possibly happen? And so we make that in our mind, Sheree, that actually, you know what? They're scared of rejection. Like the fear of rejection is probably one of the biggest fears that most people reap. And that's the reason why that holds them back and knocks their confidence. But it's like anything, like just because it's not right for one person, may be right for somebody else. So it's challenging the status quo. It's putting it on its head and challenging certain gremlins, if you want to call it that, or certain questions and turning them on their head and looking at it from a top-down perspective and saying, why do I think that way? What's the reason for that? Okay. And where do these challenges come from? Okay. So where do these thoughts process? Where do these fears come from? Do they stem from my childhood? So it's about self-awareness more than anything else. So anyway, I hope that kind of answers the question.
Adam, yes, look, there are so many different points that I want to touch on. But the first one is when you mentioned about like young children, just really not knowing fear, not knowing failure, and being persistent to just continue to try and try. I think that is the continual journey of an entrepreneur, a true entrepreneur, because think about how many times Walt Disney failed before he was successful with Disney. And there are
Absolutely.
so many other examples in history of people that have repeatedly what looks like a failure, and it turns out to be a huge company or a great success in their business. That is so great. So just keeping with the same thought process in terms of things that, and I know McDonald's was a transition, but once you became a full-time entrepreneur, what are some of the things just in hindsight that you wish maybe that you'd done differently, or the way that you maybe had started a company that you want to share with our listeners?
I think from my perspective, because I had a very early taste of entrepreneurship. So it doesn't matter when you start, okay? And this is really important to understand that, right? You can start at age 11 or you can start at the age of 70. It doesn't really make any difference. Some people come up to me and they're like, oh, I'd love to start my business, but I'm too old. I'm like, you know what age Colonel Saunders was when he started KFC? He was 65.
Oh,
Are
yeah.
you kidding me? There's so many examples of this. But I think from my perspective, if I making that transition, if you like, there's so many things that I transition, not from an early age, because I also got into elite athletics as well. So I studied and trained with Olympic athletes in distance running. And again, all of that. So the sports conditioning, the psychology, the starting up of a business aged 11, all of those skills, mindset hacks, and whatever it is, can all be transitioned into entrepreneurship. Now, just because I adopted and I embraced those skills doesn't necessarily mean they can't be learned later on in life. So, yes, I have got a bit of an upper hand on a lot of people, but but I'm still learning. I'm still I'm still a work in progress. And that again we can never learn too much, Cherie, if that makes sense.
Oh, definitely. And Colonel Sanders is such a great example. And then there are so many other people who never retire. Look at Warren Buffett. I think
Yep.
he's going to be sitting over there at Berkshire Hathaway until he decides to leave. And just because of your age does not mean that you still don't have things to contribute. Now,
Exactly.
one example that I love, Jeff Bezos is still a relatively young guy. Jeff has basically given up the day-to-day management of the company and still reaps the benefit of all the hard work that he put in very early. That's just another leadership model that entrepreneurs can look at. Once you build it, you go hire competent people to do the day to day, make it work, and you just have those dividends that you're paid time and time again, and the benefit of building that wonderful company.
Absolutely. And the other thing as well that you got to take into consideration is looking at role models and looking at people that relate to you. Okay. And we can learn from the Jeff Bezos of the world and like forth. You can copy what they do. Running a business isn't difficult, but we make things so complicated. We make it so difficult for ourselves. But most of it's here in our head. The biggest bottleneck, and I can guarantee you that all of the listeners that are listening in right now, I can guarantee you the biggest bottleneck in your business, in your life is you. You
Oh,
are the problem.
definitely. Now, one thing too, because I'm an asset protection coach, and I tell folks, get a team. I understand that when you are a brand new business, you may not have the budget to hire people full time, but there are fractional professionals, fractional CMOs, CFOs,
Yep.
CIOs, just everything that you can actually get to work in your business to help you grow. And there are certain things, depending on what your talent is, that you almost have to outsource so that the highest, that you get the highest return for the value of your time. You know,
Absolutely. Bang for your buck.
yeah,
100%.
yeah.
Going back to your question, by the way, because I know that I digressed a little bit, you asked me about what would I change differently. I think the only thing that I would change differently, Cherie, is to figure out who is it that has already achieved what I want to achieve, right? My vision. So
Yes.
create that vision, okay? Reach out to those people. Now they could be mentors, they could be business owners, they could be leaders. It doesn't really matter. Follow them on social media, right? So follow them on social media. I suppose you could follow them around, sign up to their newsletters, whatever it is, but learn from them, learn from their techniques, learn about their leadership practices, learn about their and you are your authentic you. I'm not saying change you, but you can still emulate and not necessarily, I suppose, duplicate about what's been done right. Okay. There's no point in reinventing the wheel. If something's already been done correctly, okay, and you're trying to achieve what that person's already achieved, you can learn so much from that individual in terms of their mistakes, in terms of their insights, and in terms of just, again, life lessons. This is something that I really endorse, especially when it comes to our mastermind, is putting together really good groups of people that you can use as a sounding board to gain insight from, which enhances collaboration, it enhances personal growth, it enhances a growth mindset. Because again, running a company, I don't care who you are, it's a lonely game. And if you don't have those people around you, it's going to be a struggle.
That is so good when you talked about the growth mindset, because you have to have a growth mindset if you are running a business. And you definitely have to have those people that you can bounce things off of. Tell us a little bit about your mastermind.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been running masterminds for about 6 years. So I started off in Stockholm, Sweden, because I was actually living there originally. Now, if you don't know Stockholm, Sweden, it's basically a city which has got about 1 million people in. So it's pretty small. And then I created this vision, Sheree, and I offered only a small number of clientele or applicants to be available. And then we had people flying in from Europe, from London, etc. And they all wanted to learn, they all wanted to grow, and they all wanted to collaborate. And I literally picked the most amazing venue in the whole of the city. I picked a 5-star. There was only one 5-star hotel at the time, but it was called the Grand Hotel. It dated back to the 16th century, and the architecture is amazing. They put on an amazing spread. For me, if I want to be part of a mastermind, I want to create an environment where it's difficult to fail under those terms, right? So you've got to put your clients in an environment where it's difficult to fail, basically in a nutshell. And so we used to meet up once a quarter, and obviously we duplicated that onto the online space, which was okay, but it's again because of COVID and stuff. And then actually most recently over the last few months, we've now started that position up. And it's interesting. We have we have an application process. We keep the numbers low deliberately, but also we create a wait list as well. So the reason why we create that wait list, Sheree, is because I only have capacity for working with a certain amount of clients. But also what's really important as part of, certainly with our mastermind, is culture. Because if you don't have a good culture, it's not going to work, right? One poison apple is like a virus, right? It can destroy everything. So you got to make sure that you pre-qualify people accordingly. So the mastermind we just launched last few months ago, and it's mainly for established business owners, Sheree, all within the professional services industry. So one thing that we have found in working with these particular clients is that they are technicians. They are the business, highly qualified, normally have degrees or master's degrees or PhDs, all right? But what they lack is business acumen, right? They lack confidence, but they also lack the skill set as well as the mindset to be able to scale and exit. And I'm one of my big drivers, Sheree, is it globally worldwide, and this includes the United States, by the way, is less than 18% of all business owners exit from their business, as in sell and exit. That's a really low number. Less than 48% actually have some sort of plan, but most don't execute. So my driving force, my goal, my vision is to increase that number so that when you come to retirement or when you come to the end of your entrepreneurial, right, and you want to take it easy a bit more, right? Is that you can walk away. You've got some money in your pocket, right? Like a pension pot or something like that. And you can say, do you know what? I did a damn good job. This is what my 25, 30 years of blood, sweat, and tears has done. And I've now got something tangible that I can actually walk away with. And you know what? There's so many people that don't have that in place. And it's sad to see. And that's the reason why I do what I do.
If you had just one piece of advice to share with entrepreneurs on how to play big faster and just with entrepreneurship in general, what would it be?
I think for me, it would be go back to core foundations. So what do I mean by that? What do I mean by core foundations? Going back to understanding what is the reason why you do what you do. Why do you want to do what you do? So that's key. That's like your DNA, right? That's super important. And secondly, and I already mentioned it before, seek out who has already succeeded in what you're trying to achieve. Okay. And whoever resonates with you, duplicate what they do. Okay. Find out what they do. Tap into their knowledge. Tap into learning about the mistakes that you are already about to go on that journey. Because if you're already pre-anticipating that you're going to come into some obstacles, which you will, okay, then you can be more prepared. And when you're more prepared, guess what? You'll move faster through those obstacles. So that's my piece of advice.
Adam, thank you so much for joining this episode of the podcast. If the listeners want to get in contact with you, just to follow up or to work with you, what's the best way to contact you?
Probably the best way I would say is on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn is my playground, if you like. I'm always on there. And you can always go to my website, which is called adamstrong.net.
Thank you. And to everyone out there, if you have not subscribed to the podcast on YouTube or followed us on Apple or Spotify, please do so. We would love to get more content like this into your inbox, on your phone, your iPad, wherever you listen to podcasts. Thank you. And until next time, play big faster.
Thanks for listening to this episode, and remember to play big faster.